everyone. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Faces of Founders. Today we have Associate Professor of the Department of History, Kheraj. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Catherine.
All right, so we have some questions here that I'd like to ask you. So first off, tell us about the program that you teach in, which I mentioned, but you can elaborate upon that more, and how long have you been teaching at York University?
Okay, so I'm from the Department of History. So I teach in the history program, which is a founders program. So shout out to all my founders history students out there and faculty members. The program I teach in is the history program, which sounds kind of self-evident in terms of what it is and what it's all about, but I'll explain it anyways. It's the study of the past. We cover both a wide range chronologically as well as geographically, which is to say that we study the ancient past all the way up to the modern past, and we study Canada or North America, South America, Africa, Europe, and Asia. So we cover most of the world, and we cover a really sort of deep chronological depth of studying history. And there's a lot more, I guess, that I can say about what's involved in that, but maybe we can sort of move on and that'll come up in the discussion.
For sure, yes. That's really amazing. History is such a great discipline. I love learning about it, and when I come upon it in my courses, it's so interesting. All right, so next question is, what has your latest research been focusing on?
So I'm a historian of Canada, and I'm also an environmental historian. So the second one is the one that usually requires a little bit of explanation. So environmental history is the study of the relationship between people and the rest of nature over time. And so I study that primarily in a Canadian context, sometimes a Canada-US context. Some of the things that I look at in my research are the histories of parks. I look at urban environments. So I was working on a project that examined the role of livestock animals in cities in the 19th century in Canada and the United States, which was a really fun project and interesting because it was something that I hadn't thought about before, that, in the 1800s, people who lived in cities also raised pigs and chickens and cows and horses in numbers that were so surprising. I think that I would see that many. So that was one project that I worked on, and it kind of, I think, illustrates like what you do as an environmental historian, because you're looking at the relationship between people and the rest of nature. And in this case, it's people, animals, and the cities that they live in. And the new project that I'm working on is a history of the development of long distance oil pipelines in Canada in the 20th century. So from the 1950s, late 1940s, up to about the 1990s, oil transportation corporations built these large trunk pipelines in Canada for delivering crude oil from sites of production, primarily in Alberta and to a lesser extent in the Northwest Territories, to refineries near urban centers in different parts of Canada. So in the Vancouver area, in the Toronto area, and the Montreal area. And they built these huge long distance pipelines that carried most of the oil that people consumed in the 20th century, as Canadians in the second half of the 20th century started using more and more fossil fuels. So part of the study is to understand how that infrastructure was built. Part of it is to understand how it was regulated from an environmental perspective. So what kind of environmental regulation was applied to the construction of these pipelines? Part of it is to understand what the environmental effects were of these pipelines. So did they spill? Were there explosions? Did it go through anybody's land? And then the last part is to understand how ordinary people responded to the development of oil pipelines in the 20th century. Were there protests? Did people try to get the pipelines rerouted so it wouldn't go through their land? Were there concerns about the environmental risks associated with building pipelines? And all of this, I'm hoping, is going to reveal a little bit and help us understand a little bit more about this period from the 50s to the 90s, when Canadians transitioned in terms of their energy consumption. So if you look at how much energy Canadians consumed over time in the 20th century, the line kind of grows in the first half of the 20th century. In the second half of the 20th century, it just skyrockets. It's like
Wow.
extraordinary how much energy people start to consume, and that's
Imagine.
driven by the consumption of fossil fuels. So a Canadian in 1900 consumed far less oil than a Canadian did in 1970. In fact, between 1947 and 1970, fossil fuel consumption in Canada grew by more than 400%.
Incredible.
So the scale of that
Wow.
is incredible, and I think that part of the answer of how that happened is related to this transportation infrastructure for moving crude oil around the country. Because before that, if you're going to consume that much oil, you're going to actually have to get it from the place where it's produced to the place where it's consumed. So that's the major project that I'm working on now, and I'm also editing a collection of essays on histories of human-animal relations, which is related to the work that I was doing on cities.
Wow, that's tremendous. A very large breadth of study there, and
Yeah,
especially
yeah,
especially important to study with the climate change, and important to understand history and how they, so we can help our Earth today. All right, thank you so
absolutely,
much.
yeah. Yeah, and it is rooted to some extent in climate change and trying to understand how we reached a point where carbon pollution can change the climate of the planet. To begin to understand that, we have to understand fossil fuel consumption, and to understand why we consume so much fossil fuel, I think we have to go back into the past and look at the decisions that were made about infrastructure and energy choices.
Well, thank you so much for your passionate work in that field. All right, so thirdly, I would like to ask you, what has been the most rewarding to you as a professor?
Oh, what is the most rewarding thing of being a professor? Well, it's the students, of course.
Oh, thank you.
uh, yeah, I mean, teaching is one of the most rewarding parts of the job. Like, I enjoy doing the research, the projects that I described. I'm obviously passionate about. I'm interested in. There are research questions I want to find answers to. But day to day, in terms of the work as a professor, getting to tell stories about Canada's past and convey that to a new generation of historians who are our students, I think is really one of the most exciting things. And those two parts of my job aren't unrelated. Like, I'm not a researcher and then also a teacher. I'm a research teacher. They're connected. My students give me ideas for new projects. I present my research in my classes so students can see what I do. The research that I do informs the kind of courses that I teach as well. So I teach a course in Canadian history, but I also teach a course in environmental history. I've designed a new course that I hope to teach in the future in energy history. We teach a course in animal history, all of which is connected to the kind of research that I do. And so teaching is like really one of the most exciting parts about being a professor, but it's not unrelated to the research that I do.
Yes, it's truly professors that are as passionate and inspirational as you that help make us want to study and learn more. So thank you so much for everything. I have professors like that as well, and I'm so inspired for education now more than I've ever been before in high school and elementary. So super appreciative for that. Number four, I would like to ask you, I believe that the power of an education can powerfully change someone's life forever. Please describe why you think that having a post-secondary education is so foundational in one's future success.
Well, I mean, I think I'm obviously inclined to agree with you
Yeah.
that an education can change a person's life. One of the reasons I believe that is I experienced it myself. Like, I did an undergraduate degree and had a wonderful experience as an undergraduate student that opened my eyes and my thinking, and allowed me to see the world and understand it in ways that I didn't before I did my bachelor's degree, which led me to want to try to answer more questions. And so I did graduate studies, a master's degree, a PhD, and now I work as a professor, which is not a common path. Like, most students aren't going to do that. But that feeling, that experience of opening up your mind, thinking about the world in other ways, and I think most critically, being able to answer questions about the world, like, why do we consume so much oil and gas in Canada, right? To to speak to one of the research projects that I work on. Those are the kinds of things that an education can help you answer, and especially an education based at a research university like York, right, where we are actively pursuing those answers. For me as an undergraduate student, the real question was, where do I go to try and get those answers? Should I be a political science student? Is political science the place where I'm going to get the best answers? Is geography the place where I'm going to be able to get the best answers? For me, it was history. For other students, it's going to be sociology. For other students, it's going to be criminology. And so I think that's maybe the thing that's most exciting about being an undergraduate student and getting that education, is finding that path to getting those answers about how the world works. And then I think for many people, getting an education changes your life because it helps set you on a career path in some ways. So if you end up doing your degree in human resource management or social work or a professional program, that can really help set you on a course toward a career, and in some ways that will shape the rest of your life. For some students, they will start day one in those programs and end up on their way towards that career, and that's the way they'll shape their lives. For others, they'll start in one program and switch to another and realize an interest that they had never thought of before, that led them towards their career. And for many of our students in history, the career outcomes are so variable, right? Like, you could follow a path like I did, where you do history programs and become a historian. You can also, I had a student who completed his degree in history, and his first job when he graduated was working at Kijiji, at a web startup, basically. And so I think what's exciting there is, like, a liberal arts education provides you with this versatility of skills and knowledge that can be applied in a wide range of career outcomes. And it isn't so much about the kind of training that you get. Like, I don't think I got specific training in my undergraduate education that taught me how to do a job. I think I got an education that taught me how to think, that widened my knowledge about the world, that made me capable of doing many more jobs, made me capable of being trained to pursue a number of different careers. I happened to end up in history and a whole variety of other places that our graduates end up.
Yeah, there's so many interesting fields to study at York, and we get the amazing opportunity to have electives where we can do stuff outside our major. Like, I took a couple history courses, and I was just so blown away. I just so interesting, and I was so happy I took them. And yeah, just
Yeah, and you don't get that many opportunities in your life to just freely explore something and spend that much time with it. Like, I usually point this out to my fourth year students, that when we're reading a book in a history course in fourth year, for many students, that'll probably be the last time they sit in a room with a group of 20 or so other people who have all read a book on the history. Like, I used to teach a course on the history of Toronto, and we read a book on the history of Parkdale, the Parkdale neighborhood. And for most of the students, that'll be the only time in their lives they ever do something like that, unless you join the weirdest book club ever. You're not ever going to have that experience. It's so unique. It's so rare to be able to have the time and the resources to be able to dedicate yourself to exploring new ideas and learning something like that. So I think it's hard to see it when you're in the middle of your coursework and you're trying to get everything done and keep up with exams and assignments, but it really is like a pretty exciting time. And I hope that students at least have a moment or two to take a step back and think about what they're going through.
yes, for sure. Thank you so much. So we have a unifying question throughout the series that we ask everyone, regardless of whether they're a student or college fellow. So this will be the last question. What inspires you to study the subject field that you have chosen?
Why am I a historian? What inspires me? Well, so I think the reason that I got interested in environmental history is that I found history stimulating, interesting. I thought it could answer questions. Like, if I wanted to understand anything, I found through history that context was the way I could understand it best, which is essentially what the discipline is all about. And then I found myself in environmental history because it turned out that thinking about the way that we relate to nature actually can change the way we understand the past. So I think traditionally in history, we think about the past being shaped by decisions that people make. You know, this prime minister made a decision that led to this outcome. This president decided to go to war. This worker decided to participate in a strike. And those are the ways traditionally we understand how how change happens and how history proceeds. But environmental history disrupts all of that because it asks how non-humans work as actors in the past. Do horses matter for understanding history? Does a forest matter? Does a hurricane matter? And it turns out in a lot of cases it really does. And I think today, as you know, we are doing this interview during the 6th or 7th month of a global pandemic, we are all experiencing what it's like when a non-human element of nature shapes history. Like, we are all living at the mercy of a microbe that is killing, now over 1 million people, infecting millions around the world, destroying economies, changing our work lives, our family lives, everything. This essentially is what environmental history illustrates, right? The degree to which the past is not shaped solely by the decisions that we make, but is shaped by our relationship between our decisions and the autonomy of nature itself. That we always operate within a set of natural constraints. And that becomes a way of understanding how choices are made, how change happens, how events are shaped by not just people, but the non-human factors that influence all of our lives every day.
Yes, because they're all around us. We all share the same land as them, and they're obviously going to interrelate with us. So we got to learn about them and how we can respect.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
hopefully, maybe in some instances, it helps us understand better ways of living with nature into the future. If we can kind of understand the context of our contemporary relationships with the environment, as well as understanding past human societies and how they used resources, made food, lived, played, worked in different varying relationships with the natural world.
All right. Well, that's all questions I have for you today. So thank you so much, Professor, for joining us, and thank you, viewers, for coming again to watch the show. So
Thank you.
Everyone, have a great day, and thank you again, Professor.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye. This is Catherine reporting from Faces of Founders. On the very next episode, we will be having the VP of Academics and External Affairs, Matthew Azar. It will be an amazing episode. And always remember, knowing your community forges stronger unity.